Hey there, I'm Chris Hogg, and we are live at Inventures, and I am joined by Danielle Gifford, Director of AI at PwC. Danielle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
I want to unpack with you the journey of AI in large enterprise. You know, it's not a new, AI has been around, it's not a new thing, but we hear all kinds of stories on different levels of deployment and familiarity and optimization. Can you give us sort of a state of where Canada is at for large enterprise and AI adoption?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, and as you know, AI has been around for a long time. It's actually been around since 1956. So the technology isn't necessarily new or novel. I think maybe some of the applications are. But what that means is a lot of companies and large enterprises in Canada actually have a lot of different AI initiatives going on, or kind of skunkworks projects and different types of use cases. And so because of this going on inside enterprise, what we're starting to actually see is, where is the ROI and how do we think about adoption from a large enterprise perspective? And so with these different types of applications, what we're seeing, I would say from a PwC perspective, is companies are like, okay, how do I actually bring this under one roof? How do I think about the governance? How do I optimize for the types of technologies that we're using, for the types of models that we're deploying, for the types of people that we're trying to hire, so that people can work a little bit more efficiently and work together in terms of what they're trying to achieve, and kind of bring it under a little bit more of that kind of governance structure.
For large enterprise, that if through the evolution of tech, the growth of SaaS, big businesses that are supported by ISPs or vendors and things like that, does the AI world exist in the same way? Because you said bringing it under one roof. I'm just curious, is it being internalized, or is it still that model of support through a network?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say what differs a lot from, small enterprises in terms of large enterprises is small. You might not have as many dollars to actually focus on. You might not actually have the type of AI expertise that you can have in-house, whereas some of the large enterprises, you might actually have an entire analytics team that you can work with and you can leverage. Now, on the large enterprise side, what we do see is, you have these specialists that you're working with, whether they be machine learning developers, whether they be software developers, whether they be data engineers, but you still sometimes might need that external support when these new types of technologies like generative AI or agentic AI are coming, so that you can get those different types of skill sets in as you think about the use cases and you think about your strategy. And so I would say it's almost a little bit of an augmentation of both, where it's you're leveraging and you're training your current teams, but you're also using some of the strategic vendors, whether it be Microsofts or the Big Fours or the boutiques, when you need it on certain types of applications.
I want to come back to agentic AI, but in terms of deployment, maybe it's industry specific, but where are operations being optimized? Can you, practically, where is AI being deployed to optimize? What's the focus?
Yeah, I would say if we look at it from an industry perspective, and especially in Canada, unfortunately, US is way ahead of us when we think about the actual adoption and deployment. But when we look at it from the industry, finance is really far ahead. And why is that in terms of what we're actually seeing? Well, a lot of their data is structured, it's tabular. They've been doing these types of models and these types of trainings for actually decades. And so when we're seeing the actual application and deployment of these different types of tools and models, we're seeing it a lot in the finance area. Now, from an enterprise perspective, if you're thinking front office or back office, a lot of companies are usually focusing on back office first, even though it might not actually get you, that ROI or that revenue that you're looking for. But what it does is it allows you to kind of think about that development from a proof of concept, MVP, pilot deployment in a little bit of a safer setting. So you're not necessarily having a customer-facing chatbot that might be having an issue, or, selling a truck for $1. It's you can actually work and understand the intricacies of the model on the back end. And then as you start to fine-tune that and get more comfortable with the technologies, then you can kind of start looking a little bit more forward-facing.
For a large organization, big companies move slower, and within some companies, there's obviously speed, and entrepreneurs, I imagine, carry the baton forward quite a bit. Does AI change the speed factor for big businesses? Because obviously AI can output and do things faster, but when it comes to practical realities and people governing it and managing it and doing it, what are you seeing in terms of, is it unlocking a speed factor at big business that maybe didn't exist before?
Yeah, that's a really good question in terms of the speed. I think what's happening more than ever is companies are being pushed by their employees to do more with AI. And they're also being pushed by their customers to be like, okay, we're using AI. You've been delivering the same way for the last 20 years. Like, why aren't you infusing technology into the way that you're doing things to optimize? And so we're definitely seeing it from a push from a customer perspective. But I would say there still is the same challenges inside big companies of, well, who owns this? Is it IT? Is it, your CEO suite? Is it the board that's really focusing on driving this down? And so sometimes there can be that confusion of who actually has the ownership of it and who should be running with it. Because now with all the different challenges and all the different risks that we're seeing, it's more just of a multifaceted kind of conversation. And so there still is a challenge of like, we need to move really fast. We want to make sure we're deploying. We want to make sure we're ahead of the curve. But then it's like, you have these like 10, 15, 20 person committees, and it's kind of that, progress over perfection, right? That people are really kind of searching for, but it's hard because people are getting kind of like locked in these decisions.
I want to go back to your earlier point that things are moving faster in the US. Digital Journal recently released research showing that innovation within organizations in Canada from a talent perspective, only 5% of employees, the workforce that work for businesses across Canada, coast to coast, believe that they are a game changer. So 5% is a grotesquely low number.
Yeah.
We got to do a lot to bring innovation in, and AI adoption is higher among the game changers. Why is the US moving faster? Like, what are we doing wrong here?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what's in kind of their nature and how they're born and bred. When I was previously I worked for two different startup companies here in Canada. One that was, leveraging augmented reality for the furniture industry, and the other one was building cloud platforms for small to medium-sized enterprises. And this was about like 10 years ago. We could not sell in Canada, but as soon as we went over to the States, we could sell.
We hear that a lot,
and
too.
that was because everyone was looking for that competitive advantage, that edge, and they're willing to invest in something that might not work out. Where I sometimes find in Canada, it's like it needs to be tested, it needs to be proven, it needs to be tried and true. We ask the same thing of our founders. When founders are trying to raise money in Canada, even if it's a pre-seed, it's like, well, where are your customers, right? Whereas in the US, they're like, well, that's a really good idea and you're a founder with conviction. And so sometimes I think as Canadians, we need to be a little bit more hungry and we need to adopt. And I think we also need to be okay with the fact that things might not always work out as long as we're failing and, failing forward or we're learning from that I think that's going to help us really in the long run.
Avoid that slow no that Canadian companies sometimes fall back on.
Yeah.
To jump back again to your earlier point on agentic AI, in large enterprise, deployment of AI and then agentic AI, as agentic AI comes online and it's being used, but as adoption increases, does that change a path for an organization in a way that you're helping organizations navigate? Like, is it a different complex path than just adopting AI in general?
Yeah, I would actually see it now more. And even this week, Microsoft has their Build conference as an accelerator. The ability of what you're able to do with agents, and like I'm more familiar with what's happening on the Microsoft side. That's where we've been building a lot internally. And you no longer need, a technical background. You no longer need to be able to understand and write code, but you need to be able to understand, what is that process? And then you can actually build out these agents around that, understanding the knowledge base, the actions, the triggers. And so what I'm finding more is having agents acts as a little bit of an accelerant compared to sometimes that traditional AI or maybe even generative AI. Because as long as you know and understand what your processes are inside an organization, and not all companies know and understand their processes, but as long as you know and understand what that is, you can actually develop these agents around that to execute on some of the tasks and some of the goals. And so as, the Microsofts, the AWSs, what have you not, start to develop these kind of low-code agents that are accessible to kind of the everyday person, when you have an individual that understands the technical world enough to be dangerous and understands, what the business needs, you can really drive a lot more than what you used to be able to do in the past. Now, that is without a doubt not saying that it's easy and it takes time to learn, but I'm definitely seeing it as more of an accelerant compared to, some of the traditional ways of working with AI.
I'd love some final thoughts on your end around upskilling and reskilling for organizations where it feels like there's always a new technology, always a new thing to adopt. And there are laggard industries that are still dealing with technologies that came out 10 years ago, 5 years ago, those who are trying things now. And then even those who are advanced, it's, working with AI and or we use it ourselves, but you really have to use it on a regular basis to train a muscle that doesn't exist, is what we have found, until you're familiar with it, because it can fundamentally change workflow. How do you go about upskilling, reskilling, supporting talent development when this is such a complex, fast moving? Like, what does a large enterprise do?
Totally. And I will say, even for someone in my role, change fatigue is real.
Yeah.
We're constantly changing the products, the way we work. Even when our cell phones update, it's like, well, where was this? Why isn't that there? And so from a large enterprise perspective, focusing on reskilling and upskilling, in my mind, will be one of the biggest areas of focus over the next couple of years. Because as we were saying earlier, your people are one of your biggest assets when you think about it. They know and understand the business. They know and understand how things work. But a lot of times they're so scared and they're so resistant to this technology, because if you look at the headlines, it's like, well, AI is going to take my job.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I don't want to adopt it, like, if it's going to take my job. And so getting people comfortable with the technology, how to use it, when not to use it, making sure that you're not building a contract and, co-pilot and then putting that in front of a customer is something that's really important. But I think that companies need to re-envision the way that they do traditional corporate learning or traditional corporate development, because we've all been in those, classes where you're just kind of going through and you're like, yes, I understand. Yes, I get it. But it's making it hands-on and doing prompting parties, having escape rooms, like making it fun and accessible for people to kind of be a part of. Because like you said, once people actually start to use it and adopt it, they actually find better ways of working with it than you do. And that's something that you really want for your employees and for your teams, is to be able to put the power back in their hands and to empower them to do the jobs the best way they can, so that they can focus on some of those higher value tasks, not some of the manual, data-driven, day-to-day admin.
Prompting parties are the new hackathons, I guess.
Yeah, prompting parties. We're going to make it a thing.
Danielle, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For more information on artificial intelligence and how it's being applied across large enterprise, visit digitaljournal.com.